Before using any machine in the shop, you should read and understand the owner's manuals. This is our router table, or table router, however you want to say it. The table router has a bit in there that makes the cut into the side of the board, or makes a profile or decorative cut. And so that bit can be changed out to a variety of different profiles. The fence is used in some applications, in most applications, to get us up to the bit. So before we do anything with this, we need to make sure it's unplugged, so that if this were to accidentally get turned on, we wouldn't have our fingers near there. So when we come up to the router table, before we start using it, we don't want to assume that this machine is set up for what we need. Just because little Billy was using it in front of you and doing a similar application, you would want to make sure that this is set up for your parameters and what you need. One thing that's always important to check is that the bit is in there secure. We don't want to just assume that little Billy set it up and he's got it in there tight. Maybe it's vibrating loose and we can't tell. So it's not a bad idea to pull that motor out, to check the bit to make sure it's secure in there, and then check your height. Make sure that it's set to the right height. Just don't use it just because someone in front of you used it. You want to make sure you check all the settings before you start using it for the first time. So we're going to move this fence. We just loosen these T-nuts on each side and push that back. It gives us a little bit more access to the blade. Now this machine is the exact same unit as our portable router. Now this would be our fixed base router, and it's the exact same unit that's mounted underneath there. So when we're going to change blades, we could have two different motors set up and just easily swap them out. Or you could pull that motor out, change the blade, and put it back in, however you want to do that. The first thing we need to do when changing a blade is loosen the locking mechanism on there. Once you do that, on each side of the handle, there are some little tabs, and those tabs need to be pushed in. Once they're pushed in, that base should separate from the motor. Now, if you're doing this underneath the machine, you need to make sure you catch that motor so that it doesn't fall and hit the ground. Now we're going to take the bits out, and we have two wrenches, and one should have a smaller side and the other one has a bigger side. The smaller side goes on the bottom, the bigger side goes on the little nut that's there, and we're going to go counterclockwise or to the left there and loosen that. Now when I loosen it, it gets finger loose, but this chuck has a safety feature to keep me from having this bit vibrate loose. So it came loose, okay, but then it tightens back up. So I loosened it once and then it tightens back up, and then I grab it and loosen it again, and now my bit should be able to slide right out. Okay, slide right out of there. The part that holds the bit in place is called a collet. Now the collet can come out of the machine, and I would recommend taking this out anytime you change the bit. Even if you're going with the same sized bit or same size shank, you can clean that out by tapping on it, and it cleans out all the little flutes in there so that they're clean and can compress against the shank of the router bit. Now when we look at our router bits, we have two different size shanks. We have the the 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch shank. So we're going to have to find the right collet based on the size of shank we need. So our two collet options would be a 1/4 inch collet or a 1/2 inch collet, depending on what you need for the bit you choose. A couple other things about the bit here. We typically see two different kinds of bits. One's without bearings, there's no guide bearing on this whatsoever, and one with bearing. So the bearing allows the workpiece to ride against there, and it sets how far in it's going to cut. So this is going to be for the edge of a board, where this one that has no bearing is going to be for more along the middle of the board. It could be used along the outside edge as well, but the fence has to be in place to keep your cut straight. This one, the fence is just getting you close, and that bearing is what is getting you a straight cut. Now, anything that has a bearing, before you install, I would grab that bearing and spin it, and just make sure it spins freely. If it does not spin freely, it's seized up, As this spins around, it's going to create a lot of friction around your workpiece, and it's going to cause burn marks all around your project that are going to be difficult to get off. So now that we've determined we're going to put this bit in, it's a 1/4 inch shank. We pick the appropriate collet, okay? We can make sure that that's cleaned out again. Just tap on it a little bit, make sure it's cleaned out. We're going to line it up with the threads on top. Once you get it in place, get it so the threads are starting to go. It should go very easily. If it's hard or tight to turn right away, then you're cross-threading it. You've got the threads mismatched and they're not gonna thread correctly. If you take a wrench and just try to turn it, you're gonna create cross threads all the way down that are gonna ruin the drive motor and the collet. So we're gonna get the collet put on to a reasonable size here. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my bit and insert it in. Now I like to insert the bit in all the way down. When I'm all the way down, I'm at the bottom of this bit here. And so what that allows me to do is make sure I'm in adequate. I'm not gonna leave it all the way down. I'm gonna pull it up about a 1/4 inch. And what that does is make sure I'm not bottomed out against the nut, or that I'm not bottomed out in the motor, that the shank is not touching the motor inside. If we are touching the bit against the collet or the shank inside, we have a chance of getting excess vibration, and it could work that bit loose faster. So we want to make sure we have it up just a little bit and some spacing. Then we can take our 2 wrenches and tighten that back up. So I'm going to just take my fingers and get it as tight as I can, and then take my wrenches and finish tightening that. Once the bit is secure, we're ready to put the base back onto the motor. So as we look at the base here, we're going to tilt this down, and right here by this black clamp, there's 2 pins in here. These 2 pins have to line up with one of the 2 grooves on the router. There's one on this side and there's one on this side. So either groove has to line up with those 2 pins. When you put them together and they line up, they should kind of clamp or slide down, and then those 2 tabs on the bottom will click into place when they're right. Now we're not going to lock the lever yet because we're going to set the size. So we are going to look at the height of the bit and determine how high we want that to be. If it's not the right height, we take the collar around the motor and we turn that either right or left to get the blade to move up or down. Once you get that in its correct location, then you can tighten or lock that up. All right, so we're underneath the machine. We can see the motor here. What we're looking for is the black locking clamp, which is over here on this side right now. I'm going to take that and open that up by just pulling on it. Once it's opened up, then I can find the 2 tabs, one on each side of the handle, and we're going to squeeze those and have the motor release out. Okay, so once the motor is out, you can change the bit. When you've got everything lined up, then you're going to take and line this back up. Now I prefer to do this from the top side, and I'll show you that here in a minute. I'm going to have my hands underneath the machine, and as I'm looking out through the top, I'm going to line up those pins. So let's go to the top and take a look. So as I'm here on the top side, I can look and find my pins are located right over here on the side. So I'm going to take my motor under the table, and I'm going to stay up here on top of the table and line those up, and then I can watch it and get it into place. So I like to do it from the top side with my arm underneath. Some people will get underneath there and line it all up and then slide it up. Whatever you prefer to do. Now we need to set the height of the blade. So as we take a closer look at the blade, we're going to take our workpiece and see where we want that to be lined up. Now, if it's too high or too low, you grab that black ring that's around the collar of the motor and you twist it up or down to get it to raise or lower for whatever profile look you're getting. When you have it in place, then that's when you're going to come back underneath, find that same locking lever, and now we're going to lock it in place. Okay, while you're down here, you can find the on-off switch. Depending on how you put the motor in, it might be up front or it might be on the back side of the motor, depending on how you oriented it when you put it in place. So we're going to set the fence. The fence is what's getting us close to the blade and helping us control the material. So the bearing is really what's doing the depth, how far into the wood it's cutting. But what we're going to do is get the fence set to the front of the bearing. And we're going to do that by taking our workpiece and setting it on top of the blade, but not on top of the bit, or not on top of the bearing. The bearing and the workpiece are just touching there. My wood is on top of the cutter. So now that I've got that set, I can slide my fence over into place and have it touch the workpiece, and that should be the front of the bearing. So when I pull this away here, let me get this tightened up. When I pull this away, the front of this bearing and this fence should be at the same point or position. Before we turn this on, we're going to check the power cord. It's the operator's position to make sure that the cord is in good condition. So as part of your responsibility, you're going to check that the prongs are all there that need to be, that nothing's missing, and then you can run your hand down the cord and make sure it's in good condition. You might need a safety device like our push block. Our push block is going to allow you to put pressure down close to the blade. Like our other machines, the miter track here is a reference point. If our fingers are over that miter track, we need to be using a push block or push shoe. If we don't use a push block or shoe and our fingers are just outside that, what's going to happen is it might lift up or have high spots in there that we're not pushing down tight to the table. So that's why we want to use the push block to keep pressure right by the blade, so as I'm running that through, it's nice and uniform. Now on a blade like this, we're going to do two passes. One pass is going to remove the bulk of the material, and the second pass is going to come along and clean up the cut and make it a nice finished cut. If you were using a bit like this, quite a bit larger profile, and as we line that up and look, there's a lot of material going to be removed at once, especially if we're way up towards the top profile or the top edge of the bit. So this bit you might have to lower and do a couple smaller passes working your way up, or maybe you have it all the way up but you move the fence. So the first time you're cutting a little bit and then slowly you move the fence in until you're finally hitting the bearing. So bigger bits are going to need multiple cuts to remove the bulk of the material, and then you can go around it one last time at your finished size to get a finish cut. When we talk about these bits and blades and machines, if this machine spins at 10,000 RPM and this bit has 2 cutting surfaces, that's 20,000 cuts a minute. If we look down here, this bit has 3 cutting surfaces, and that's going to be 30,000 cuts a minute. That is a lot of rotations and cuts before you could react and get your finger out of there. So that's why we want to maintain that 4-inch margin of safety. When we're cutting work pieces, especially solid lumber, we want to do the end grain first. As we come along and router this, the end is going to chip out. Okay, when the end chips out and then we come with the grain, it doesn't chip with the grain. So all those chips that we created are going to be gone because that cleans them up with the grain. So we would do the end grain here, then we would turn the board around, do the end grain over here, and then we would turn and go with the grain. Which direction are we feeding this board into the machine? Typically, it's from right to left. And how we know that is we're going to go opposite the way the bit is turning. So we know the way the bit is turning based on the cutting edge of the blade there. If you don't know, you could always turn it on, turn it off, and watch the rotation. But the bit is going to spin counterclockwise in this position. And so when it's spinning this way and we feed it in against the cut, that's going to give us control over the workpiece. If we were to feed it the other direction, it's going to be spinning the same direction we're trying to go, and it's going to grab it and jerk us along and kind of push us faster than we want to go. So when we go against the cutter head, this allows us to control the speed and pace that we're going. All right, let's make a cut and take a look. I'm going to turn it on, line it up, and run it through. So what we've made here is a rabbet joint. So the second pass, make sure that the bottom of the rabbit is nice and uniform. The first pass is removing the bulk of the material. Maybe it's a little rougher cut. And then the second pass is going to give us a nice finished cut. When you take a look at this piece that was just run, and you can see when we do the end grain, how we get tear out on that last profile. We've got our tear out. Let's now put this tear out edge against the fence and get that cleaned up and see what that looks like. So now we take a look at that same corner that had that chip, and we can see that it's gone. We've gotten rid of that chip by cutting the straight grain second and cutting across the grain first. If you have any questions with regards to this machine or any other machine in the shop, please talk to your instructor so we can get those questions answered and you will be comfortable and have the knowledge to use this machine safely.